I'm going to touch on the care market in general, and then kinship care, and perhaps specifically babies, as per the title. But children's services around the country are under massive pressure. It's our biggest budget pressure from a local authority perspective. People talk about social care. I wish I could spend the money in social care, but the staff do not exist. So the biggest budget pressure is in children's services. And every year we battle with those overspends. We're also tackling, at the same time, what are very often poor outcomes for children in the care system. Mostly it's best for children to be with families. There were 57,000 children in the fostering system this time last year, for example. But fostering is itself a challenge in the current climate. COVID isolation, not being able to have people come and go from your house, has had a huge impact on fostering and the ability to recruit and retain people in that sector. The State of the Nation report, competition and marketing report into the children's care sector last year said that that market is broken. It is in need of significant work. Which all further highlights the importance and just how vital kinship care is in that sector, and increasingly so into the future in what is otherwise a volatile market. Living with family or friends is often the best outcome for a child. Better outcomes, it's cheaper, frankly, from a local authority perspective. And it's outside of those market pressures that mean that fostering and adoption are so difficult. Something we can manage much more easily in some ways if we wanted to do so. But there is inconsistent support, and my right honourable friend touched on a lot of it, much less than for fostering or for adoption. Even though in some ways there are additional challenges that don't exist in those areas. Relationship with birth parents, for example. More often than not, you would hope there is a reason why families can't look after their child, and that can lead to incredibly strained relationships with whoever looks after that child. You don't want to stereotype, but my right honourable friend touched on some examples: imprisonment, substance abuse, as reasons why that might be the case. And clearly for granny or granddad to take on a child in that circumstance, with perhaps a mum or dad who is on drugs or alcoholism, that can be an incredibly difficult relationship for them to manage, alongside the work pressures, the financial pressures and everything else that comes along with kinship care, and sometimes just has to go in the too difficult box without the support that exists. They also get less access to free childcare, which doesn't happen in other parts of the care system. Kinship carers almost uniquely don't access the 15-30 hours support in the same way as parents who adopt, for example, which is something very simple that we could do. In Nottinghamshire, we're investing in this in our budget this year. We're putting £400,000 into a specific kinship support scheme. And when we look at how we're going to balance our budget in children's services over the coming years, it has to be clearly more of that kind of support, keeping kids in their own homes or in the home of a family member or friend through kinship care, and less of the very expensive residential care where we know it costs a fortune and we know the outcomes typically are not good. So the more that we can do and the more we can invest up front in those proactive services to help kinship carers to be able to cope and look after those relatives or friends, and to be able to mitigate those financial challenges, the better off we will be in the long term, both financially and in terms of outcomes. So we want to look at how we incentivise granny and granddad or aunt and uncle to take on that challenge and to keep their family member in that loving home and environment. And we will invest in that in our budget this year. I'm very proud that we are doing that for the first time. The National Review of Children's Care Services needs to highlight the importance of kinship care and to increase the simplicity and the access to that support alongside the now well kind of understood and discussed challenges around fostering and the wider care market, which is really challenging. But as I've said, even just from a pure financial perspective in local government, early support and intervention to support people to access kinship care is much, much simpler and cheaper than the long-term challenge of long-term residential care, and then ultimately having to look after people throughout most of their adult lives, because, as I say, the outcomes for that very often are very poor. In her example, my honourable friend from South Nottinghamshire highlighted the significant cost and the lack of comparative rights compared to adoption and fostering. I've touched on some of those, and there has to be more that we can do to be able to rebalance that. My honourable friend's private members bill sounds like a fantastic start to be able to do that. I look forward to supporting that in the House. And she also focused on babies in particular. We know that those earliest years are absolutely vital in terms of those emotional connections with family, in terms of communication and language, in terms of social skills and the ability to meet other people and children and to engage in that way. And security is very important, particularly when it comes to things like that. Going in and out of different foster homes with different people, or in and out of the care system in different ways, cannot be a good environment, particularly for young babies, but all the way through the system. And kinship care tends to be a much more secure and long-term replacement. And she's right to highlight all the good work that's happened around early years workforce and investment that was in the budget last year in family hubs, and again in Nottinghamshire we are very much promoting and supporting that model. All of these things will boost the life chances of young people. There are many positives, but it's also clear that more could be done on kinship care, on the care market and on fostering. So I'd urge the Minister in his closing remarks, and obviously over the course of the coming months and years, particularly through that children's care review, to help us to support services like the one we're rolling out in Notts, which I think will be a fantastic start, and there's much more we can do. I'd welcome his thoughts and advice in the future about how we can boost and promote that, and to look at that support and those incentives that exist for kinship carers to make sure that it's at least comparable with fostering and with adoption, because it is a better outcome. It is arguably the best outcome for most children to stay with somebody that they know, that loves them and wants to look after them. The more that we can support and promote that, it's better for children, better for families, better for the taxpayer as well. So it should be at the top of our list. I'm sure it is at the top of the Minister's list. Thank you.